Hi there, I'm Jenny Kirk and you're watching my YouTube channel, and today this is going to be the first video in something that's hopefully going to build up into a little bit of a different series, and it's where we're going to be looking at things like liveries of different models that have been produced ready to run, but also a little bit later on in this series I'm going to look to identifying various models that are suitable for particular eras. So let's get on and take a look at the first batch of models that I've got today to look at. First of all, when the Class 25 was first introduced, we had it come out in real life in this sort of two-tone green livery, and it's pretty nice. It's come from Bachmann. Bachmann have produced quite a few in this livery over the years, and this particular example, D5237, you can see it really does suit this particular type of diesel, the two-tone green. To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe they ever appeared in the all-over green livery that some of the other Type 2s did appear in. Things like I think the Class 29, possibly the Class 22 as well. Got this two-tone green. Class 47s certainly did. But it does look quite splendid on these Type 2 Derby Sulzers. We've got the grey roof, which I think actually looks quite nice. I do have a soft spot for this particular livery. On the ends, we can see that we've got these small yellow end panels. Now, the locomotives themselves did later on receive the much fuller, full yellow ends, and I just bring this example into frame. We can see that that's got the full yellow end, and it's something that I don't have a model of, but it's certainly something to look out for. If you want the sort of later BR green period, then you're certainly going to want to look for the green, two-tone green Derby 25, but with the full yellow ends. Now, I'm going to put these two off stage, and the next livery that comes up is this slightly unusual, I've seen it referred to as chromatic blue, and it's not really quite rail blue, and we've still got, you can see there, we've got the later British Rail crest there, but we've still got the D numbers, this particular example, D5218. It was quite a rare livery, not all Class 25s received this, and it kind of came in that period when British Rail was still kind of trying to find this new corporate identity to be the sleek new modern railway as the diesels were taking over from the last vestiges of steam. And before the standards were fully set, some locomotives did appear in this kind of chromatic blue livery. It actually, if I bring back in I've got a rail blue, Class 25. There's not a lot of difference there between the different blues, but certainly I can see with my naked eye, I'm not sure how well it's going to turn up on the video. The chromatic blue example is an ever so slightly different shade in there. Now, as far as the ends are concerned, it, to my eyes, looks a little bit peculiar because we've got still the small yellow ends, the half yellow ends here. So the top of the cabs, where the windows is painted in the body blue. And we're so used to those full yellow end diesel locomotives that seeing the half yellow ends on what looks to be a rail blue livery just looks really quite peculiar. And we didn't really get to see this kind of effect until the much later period, where some locomotives then would receive much more unusual liveries and would we'd see this the roll back of that full yellow end. This particular model came out as a special through Model Zone. It was commissioned by them around about the time, I'm trying to remember, I was waiting for, I think it was the Network South East Class 3, and the money was burning a hole in my pocket, and I went in and they didn't have the Network South East Class 3. They were still waiting on delivery. And not wanting to leave empty-handed, I picked up one of these, and I'm actually quite glad that I did, because it's since come in quite useful for a period that Grove Street Street Yard sometimes gets exhibited in. So a really useful model, but I think in real life there was probably only 3 or 4 of the real Class 25s actually received this livery. So something a little bit unusual for the steam diesel transition period, and probably suitable maybe to get into the very, very early 1970s, but certainly not beyond that. Now, where did the liveries go from here? Now, it was the case that we had the BR green. Let's just find that again. I have seen modelled from Bachmann this particular livery with the full yellow ends, and they did later receive tops numbers, and there were some examples that didn't get the full repaint. They got the full yellow ends and then a little, usually a blue panel, and the tops number was applied. And these seem to be models that are good from around the early 1972-1973 period, as the new tops numbers came in, through till I think late 70s. It may even have lasted to as late as 1980, but don't quote me on that, and certainly would have looked very down at heel. Now, Bachmann did produce a model of one in that particular livery, but it's not one that I have in my collection, so I can't actually show you that in the flesh here and now. So put that to one side, and we're moving on to, I'm having to demonstrate this particular livery using one of Bachmann's Class 24s, because I don't actually have a 25 in this kind of transitional period where we got the full yellow ends, but we're still rocking there the old pre-tops number with or without the D prefix. This particular model was one of the early Class 24 introductions from Bachmann. It's led a hard life. I actually donated its chassis for another project of mine, and then I later on managed to get another chassis. In fact, I think it's sat, yes, this is actually sat on a Class 25 chassis, so do forgive it that. But I put it back into service just because it was somewhat unusual, and you don't really see these around. Certainly a lot of the renumbering projects that I've seen seem to have used this particular, rather unpopular at the time, livery as the base. So to find one with the number 5087 is actually getting quite hard. So it's nominally being put back into service on a chassis that I was able to pick up second-hand, quite cheap, and repair to get running. But Bachmann did produce a Class 25 with blue with the D prefix. From memory, had the number something like D665, somewhere around that. And it actually was one of the first that I remember seeing coming fitted with the little small snow ploughs that Bachmann do occasionally do with some of the locomotives. But this is really just to illustrate how that particular livery variation would look. So we're going to put that to one side, and then we move on to the more common tops numbered BR blue, small logo. We've got the full yellow ends. Now there's 2 variations of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring into frame another one here. Let's see if we can fit them both in on the shot. And what we're looking at for here is actually quite a minor variation. We can see on this 25052, the yellow end, it's got a full yellow end. If I turn that round and just show that to you, so full yellow end. But if you look very closely, it doesn't quite wrap around the edges. But if we show this one, you can see very prominently the yellow does wrap around the edge of the cab. So it's just a minor detail variation. See there, no wrap, wrap, no wrap, wrap. I feel like one of those optometrists. It's like, and is it better now or now? But we can see there that this is also an example of Bachmann started producing factory weathered examples of these Class 25s, and this is not from the first batch. It's certainly from the batch where they started to get working directional lights, and it's something to watch out for is that the earlier releases from Bachmann don't have the directional lights. Certainly some of the features that we got in these models came on in leaps and bounds. So earlier models such as 25087 I think was the very first release of the Bachmann BR Blue Class 25. No directional lighting in that. And I think that 25054, that, let me get that into frame, 25054 here That doesn't have directional control lights, but its weathered counterpart, two numbers different here, 25052, from memory, I believe that this one does have the directional control lights. And what you also find is that there's elements of with or without DCC socket provision. Certainly the very, very early ones, they kind of had, I remember looking at the circuit board inside them, and they had almost like these solder pads where you could hardwire a socket or you chip on the end of wires to, but they didn't have that easy push fit DCC socket. And then they went on, I think they first of all had 8-pin DCC sockets, and that has later been upgraded to 21-pin ones. But these are some of the earlier Bachmann releases. I did go in for the 25s in a big way, and I've got quite a sizable collection. And the models that I've picked out to show you today, really, what I've gone for is just examples of particular livery variations to be able to describe those, rather than giving a complete overview of my full collection. So we can see here the factory applied weathering. It's quite subtle, and I like that. It's got this road dirt sprayed from the bottom, so it's not given a full overall dirty wash, which, to be honest, doesn't look right. I've seen that kind of weathering done, and it never really looks all that good. So this is just a very light weathering, and we can see there at the front, if I compare it to its unweathered counterpart here, you can see the difference that comes from that light blowover with a suitable weathered colour. And it's actually pretty effective, even though it's probably an easy enough and quite quick to replicate technique in the Bachmann factory. Now I'm going to move on a little bit, and there's a particular livery variation that I have pulled from my collection, and so I give you this 25095, and this is really about the personalisation and embellishments that some of the depots were giving to their locomotives. So one of the first obvious things from the side here is we've got the silver window surrounds, and some depots really did like to just put a slight personal touch to locomotives that were allocated to them. Most notably, this was found with some of the Deltics, for example, allocated to Finsbury Park, tended to get the silver window surrounds, but 25095 has received them. Originally produced by Bachmann, I think this was the first DCC fitted, factory fitted Class 25. Now the example I've got at the time, people who wanted DCC fitted chassis for their other locomotives tended to buy this because I think for a while it was discounted quite heavily to shift stocks. So it was an easy way for people going DCC to DCC chip their locomotives. They'd buy this, swap the chassis over. At the time the chips were quite expensive anyway, and then what they would do is they would pair the un-DCC fitted chassis with the lid that they no longer wanted. They probably bought 3 or 4 of these, but so you'd only want to keep one. And it meant that at the time I was able to pick this up from a model railway exhibition from a trade stand. I think I only paid £25. £25 for a Bachmann 25, new, never used. It's a pretty good deal, I thought. But the other embellishments that we've got on here, you can see there, we've got the, just try and bring that into frame, we've got the TOPS number there, 25095, and for some reason we've got it written backwards, a bit like the way that police cars and ambulances have it written backwards. So when you look at them in your rear view mirror, you can actually read the writing, and I don't know why somebody would want to do that to a Class 25. If you saw one of these trundling towards you through your rearview mirror, I think reading its number would be the last of your worries. But it's just an example of the embellishments. We've also got the black surrounds on the windscreens at the front, and it's just little details like this which personalise a locomotive which otherwise would just blend into the masses. So it's always nice to have a bit of variety in your Class 25 fleet with personalised locomotives like this. One of the other things I will talk about this is later released Bachmann Class 25s. We can see there they have these wire handrails. And I'm just looking through all the examples I've got here. Actually, I've picked out all of the slightly later release Bachmann Class 25s. But one thing to watch out for is certainly the first couple of batches had plastic handrails in sort of like a white flexible plastic. The Class 8s had this as well, I remember seeing that, and the Class 24s. And I'll be honest with you, the metal handrails were a vast improvement because the plastic ones were so easily broken, tricky to fit, you end up with big splodges of glue if you weren't careful. So it was a very little change that Bachmann introduced that actually added a lot to the locomotives. And the last locomotive livery that I want to show you, the 25 carried in my collection, is this. This is an Ethel. Now Ethel stood for Electric Train Heat X Locomotive. And the story behind these was that for the Fort William sleeper, I believe it was, the trains working the route to Fort William, because of the actual axle loading on the route, they couldn't send some of the bigger locomotives along there. And when the rolling stock went over to the, I guess the Mark III sleepers, they needed electric train heat. There was no longer steam heat provision. And the Class 37s, which at the time were the locomotives they needed to use, they hadn't yet gone through the electric train heat conversion program to produce the Class 37-4. So they needed in winter something that could be coupled in the train that could provide that heat to the coaches. And the way they resolved to do this, they took 3 recently withdrawn Class 25s and used their electric train heat to heat the train. So these were then pulled behind the Class 37, and they had their traction motors removed, and that reduced their weight by around 4 tons, I believe. It also meant that they couldn't then be misappropriated to actually run trains. And I don't know why British Rail was so bothered about that. Maybe there was worries about the reliability issues if you went on to thrash these as fully working locomotives when actually they'd been withdrawn. But it also, it took 4 tons off the rolling weight for the locomotive, made it, less of a drag in being pulled, and also because the traction motors would have been in the unsprung weight portion of the bogies, it also meant that they caused less wear to the track. So they appeared initially in a strange, almost like, from memory, I think it was like a reversed blue-grey livery, but one of them, Ethel 3, we see here, did receive an intercity livery here, and this was ostensibly so that it matched the coaches that it was pulling. They were also used on some of the steam specials in winter, so you'd find that you'd have something like Union of South Africa, A4 Pacific, pulling a train, and you'd have this big humdinger probably at the other end of the train trying to keep out the way, but a lot of photographers would whine and moan about this monstrosity, as they put it, getting in the way. But it has provided an opportunity for Bachmann to release a model of the Electric Train Heat X locomotive Class 25 in this really eye-catching livery, which it does actually suit the Class 25 in my opinion quite well. And in a way, it's a shame that they didn't last long enough to receive this livery in actual service. None of the Ethels, as far as I'm aware, did survive into preservation. They only lasted for a few years before the Class 37-4s came on stream, and then they were all sent for scrapping. One of the big problems with them, I think, was even though the preservation scheme was in the business of preserving some of the diesel locomotives, such as Class 25s, they did have a big problem with asbestos, and I think the general consensus was that they really were only fit for scrap because the amount of money that would have been needed to spend on them to actually strip out that asbestos. There was also the fact that they were missing their traction motors, and that would have been an expensive thing to buy as separate from the tender to buy the locomotive. But let's take a look at this livery. We've got the sort of off-white grey, the red stripe, the white stripe. One of the things that Bachmann did appear to mess up on some of their early intercity livery applications, and actually I'm told it's actually faithful to the true size locomotives, and it's actually BR that messed up, not Bachmann, but they look a bit odd in model form, is that they went white, red, white, so it looks unusually clean at the bottom. But on this Ethel, it's been correctly applied to match the coaching stock. We've then got this sort of dark grey, another off-white stripe, and then the roof is black. It is a distinctly different colour to that top grey side. And then on the front, I talked before about the half yellow ends. Well, this is a livery which really shows up that later in life there were other livery options which a variety of locomotives got, which sort of harks back to that the Hallison days of the early 60s, as some people would have you believe. And we can see all the window surrounds there are painted up. We could also see that the centre window is boarded up, and I think that was probably to do with avoiding damage, because you get lumps of ballast thrown up by the locomotive in front, and what they didn't want was these windscreens getting smashed. So I think it was a case they got boarded up. I've seen them with metal grills as well to protect some of the glass, which the metal grills tended to rust quite readily, so they really did start to look up like a boarded up youth centre. In terms of the controls, they just notched up in running to a set engine speed to power the electric train heat, and that's all that they did really. But in model form, Bachmann produced this as a special for the London Toy Fair a good number of years ago now, and then the unsold or unallocated part of the run they then sold through the Collectors Club, and they did hang around for a little while, but it was one that I felt I really did want to have. It kind of ticked all the boxes. I really like Class 25s and I really like intercity livery, so when the two come together like this, what's not to like? And the model itself actually is a fully functioning Class 25. You can pull trains, unlike with the real Ethels. You can hook this up to a train and run your intercity liveried stock in a very unprototypical way, but I tend to actually double head it as part of a sort of a late 1980s into the early 1990s steam special perhaps, but it's one that I'm particularly pleased with having, and it does take pride of place in my display cabinet. Now, the final livery that I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to put that back. The final hurrah for the Class 25s came in the late 80s when BR bid for some work with, I think it was ICI at Northwich. And as part of this, they didn't want to put a lot of expense. They took several redundant Class 25 locomotives, gave them a rudimentary overhaul, no expense spent, and they renumbered them as 25 9s. There wasn't really any modification as far as I know. They may have had things like electric train heat isolated, just generally given the once over. They weren't expected to last for a huge length of extra time, but it was forbidding for this, I think it was Northwich salt traffic or something like that. And they lasted right to the end of the Class 25's workings. And one of those locomotives, Tamworth Castle, I don't actually have a model of it. It has been released by Bachmann in two-tone green with the full yellow ends in the livery that it carried in its last year of service, but also as a special commission from, I believe it was Model Rail, back in the early days when the Class 25 was new and not been out long from Bachmann. They introduced it in what was dubbed the ice cream van livery, and that's the large logo, wrap-around yellow ends, and it was the only Class 25 that carried that livery to the best of my knowledge, and it kind of became a celebrity loco. Did a number of rail tours, lasted to be the final Class 25 in BR revenue earning service, and when it was withdrawn it passed straight into preservation. I don't actually have any locomotives in that livery. I have had a couple pass through my hands. I had Loch Rannoch Class 37-4, and I also had a Class 50 in that livery, both of which I've since sold on to the same individual actually, who was really mad keen on that particular livery, and it was one that I wasn't too bothered by, so I wasn't too sorry to let them go. But as a final Bachmann livery to talk about, it's one that I have to add into the mix. Well, I hope that's been really enjoyable to you. Don't forget to like this video and share it too, and also subscribe to the channel. You'll be the first to know when new videos are posted up, and hopefully we'll be bringing you some more in this little series coming soon. But until then, you take very good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you liked today's video, please consider checking out my Patreon page where you can help me to keep making the videos that you love. Thank you. Today's video has been brought to you by my books, Bringing Home the Stars, Twinkle Little Star, and also you can get the complete comic collections of All Over the House, Books 1, Books 2, and also the wacky zany Life of Knob T. Mouse. Thanks, and catch you later.